We were alive, but we were not living. The hunger consumed us first, then the silence.
In 1933, the heart of Ukraine stopped beating. Millions of men, women, and children starved not because food was scarce, but because it was stolen. What followed was not just the death of individuals, but an attempt to erase an entire nation. This is the story of the Holodomor, a genocide cloaked in denial and buried by time. To understand the Holodomor, we must begin with Stalin's vision. For him, Ukraine was more than a region. It was a threat. Its fertile lands, its culture, its fierce independence. These were obstacles to his totalitarian rule, and Stalin had a plan. Break Ukraine, not with bombs or bullets, but with hunger. In 1932, Stalin's government enforced quotas so brutal they became impossible to meet. Grain, livestock, even seeds were confiscated. Villages that resisted were blacklisted, cut off from trade and aid. The borders were sealed. If you tried to leave, you were shot. If you stayed, you starved. Imagine being executed for taking a handful of wheat to feed your starving family. That was the reality for millions of Ukrainians. Those who lived through it remember the hunger as a living thing. It gnawed at their bellies and minds until desperation set in. Families tore apart. Parents abandoned their children. Children scavenged the dead. The stories are too horrific to ignore. But for decades, the world did just that. Why didn't the world intervene? The answer lies in a mix of denial, politics, and complicity. Walter Duranty, a Pulitzer-winning journalist for the New York Times, parroted Soviet propaganda, calling reports of the famine exaggerated. Meanwhile, governments like Britain and the United States turned a blind eye, eager to maintain trade ties with the USSR. Millions of broken lives. That was Stalin's omelet, and the world let him cook it. But Ukrainians did not forget. They couldn't. Each family has its own story, its own loss. Maria Polanska remembers her mother collapsing in the fields while searching for roots to eat. Ivan Horbenko recalls watching neighbors turn to cannibalism in desperation. These stories aren't history. They're scars passed down through generations. The Holodomor wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a larger Soviet strategy. In Kazakhstan, a similar famine killed 1.5 million. Across the USSR, collectivization claimed countless lives. But Ukraine's loss was the deepest, the most systematic. Why? Because Stalin wasn't just targeting resistance, he was targeting identity. The famine was only one weapon in Stalin's arsenal. The Soviet regime silenced Ukrainian language, art, and faith. It was genocide not just of bodies, but of a soul. And yet, Ukraine survives. Despite the attempts to erase it, the nation stands stronger than ever. But remembering the Holodomor is about more than honoring the past. It's about fighting denial today. Denial that comes in the form of propaganda, of revisionist history, of ongoing imperialist ambitions. The Holodomor is not just a Ukrainian tragedy. It's a human one. It's a warning of what happens when power goes unchecked, when truth is silenced, when suffering is ignored. Let us remember, not out of guilt, but out of duty, to the past and to the future.